This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Hing.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, Sherry Horn Hassan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, coming to you today on November 15th, 2018, from Contact Talk Radio and a newly snowy New Jersey. We're here just embarking on a nor'easter, so hopefully we won't have any problems with our connection. But just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. Today, my guest is professional astrologer Ronnie Gale Dryeer, who's here to talk about the upcoming 2019 eclipses, and who I will be introducing properly in just a few minutes. But first, here's this week's Astro News you can use. So I'd like to first take a look at a few past events, because those of you who listen to the show regularly know that I frequently like to look back before we move forward, to catch up to where we are today, when Mars, the planet of ambition, motivation, assertion, anger, sexuality, and potential violence, ends his long sojourn through Aquarius. He'll enter Pisces a few hours after this show ends at 2:21 p.m. Pacific time and 5:12 p.m. Eastern time today. Now, Mars entered Uranus, ruled Aquarius, way back on May 15th. Which was only hours after the entrance of Uranus into Taurus, where Uranus, although he's currently retrograding right now for a short stint back through Aries, is, basically he'll be in Taurus for the next 7 years. So Mars then stationed retrograde on June 26th, back at the beginning of this summer. In mid-August, he went back into Capricorn, stationed direct there on August 27th, and then re-entered Aquarius in forward motion from September 10th until now. So if that didn't make you dizzy, altogether Mars has been in Aquarius for 6 months. Now, the Mars retrograde period from June 26th through August 27th provided us the ability to be more introspective and reactive rather than proactive. Now, Mars, of course, is the planet that gives us the ability to move to move freely, whether that's physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. So when he's retrograde, we're less active and more reactive, or as I just said, more introspective, more yin than yang. Let's just put it that way. So this June 26th to August 27th period, postponements of projects may have occurred. And according to Erin Sullivan, who writes in her book, Retrograde Planets, this period may have initiated, and I'm going to quote here, an intense search into the moral and ethical motives underlying our actions, and instigated an inquiry into the validity of goals and ambitions symbolized by the house through which Mars retrograded, end quote. So, in other words, there may not have been a need necessarily to stop what we were doing during that period. However, it's that period which gave us the opportunity to review our plans through a more conscious lens. Why are we doing what we're doing? Anything inappropriate for us might well have ended during this period. And that, of course, includes partnerships, because Mars is, again, one of the planets that is factors into how we to other people. So partnerships, relationships, as well as projects or other plans. Now, meanwhile, Venus in Scorpio stationed retrograde on October 5th, moved back into Libra, the sign of partnership, on October 31st, and she stations direct at 25 Libra tomorrow, November 16th. Venus represents all that we find beautiful. And in terms of relationship, it's anyone and anything we deem to be valuable to our lives. Venus is retrograde from October 5th through tomorrow, November 16th, allowed us to delve more deeply into our subconscious to discover whether our inner values are out of sync with our outer, more societally driven ones. And about this, Aaron Sullivan writes, quote, "If we go against our core instincts and behave in a way that which we know to be false, yet are applauded by millions, then this is a Venus problem. Fundamentally, what is right and wrong, as we mature, increasingly influences how we view society and its values, and whether those values are the ones to which we personally wish to subscribe." So, end quote. So what we value obviously includes relationships. And the question we can all ask ourselves now, especially in the wake of not only this Mars retrograde and Venus retrograde, but the past several monthly lunations during which we've seen Venus oppose Uranus and both the planets square the transiting karmic nodal axis, is, are we more empowered now? Have we revised our plans, projects, and our partnerships to better sync with our internal moral code and our true inner values? It pays to spend at least a few moments to think or meditate upon this now, so that these retrogrades don't pass us by without our ability to gain a greater level of consciousness from them. Now, also tomorrow on November 16th, but later in the evening, Mercury stations retrograde in Sagittarius for the next 3 weeks. This is Mercury's final retrograde of 2018, and he's been transiting through fire signs for this whole year period. Now, fire, the element of fire, as part of these Mercury retrogrades, asks us to review our inspirations and to connect them with how they might fuel our future. You know, fire is passion. Fire is inspiration. It's the spark that we need to then move forward to carry out whatever plans we may make or want to make. So we'll now have 3 weeks to concentrate on reviewing, reanalyzing, reworking, rethinking, and revising old plans. Mercury retrograde is always the re time, but not to start anything new. Mercury begins his retrograde at 13 degrees 28 minutes of expansive and consciousness-raising Sagittarius. So that makes this a good time to review our philosophical perspectives and to discard what no longer works, so we can open up to and recognize new perspectives. On December 1st, Mercury appears to swim back into Scorpio and stations direct there on December 6th. He'll re-enter Sagittarius on December 13th, and between then and January 4th, 2019, when he enters Capricorn, we'll all have the opportunity to put to work any ideas born out of these newly experienced philosophies and perspectives. I'd add here, mostly because I'm a professional writing coach and editor, that Mercury retrograde in Sag is a great time to review your writing work and to hone in on the big picture themes you're trying to communicate to your audience, regardless of what kind of audience you're targeting and what genre you're writing in. So if it's fiction, nonfiction, marketing copy, or a proposal of some kind, please be mindful of this. I have had a lot of clients who are motivated to write, and I guess I kind of call it the microcosm. They want to look at the small picture, but they do, say a memoir, for example, because I've done a lot of editing of memoir stories. They fail to actually recognize what is the larger theme. All right. So what Mercury retrograde, while he's in Sagittarius, can help anyone who is interested in writing, like I said, in any genre or for any purpose, even if it's just a love letter. It helps us to really hone in on what it is we're trying to say vis-a-vis the big picture themes. So think about that. When he re-enters Sagittarius again going forward, you can then, that's the time when you may incorporate your newfound big picture realizations into your work and further ground this when Mercury enters Capricorn early next year. So meanwhile, the usual Mercury retrograde cautions apply during this period. Beware of miscommunication and delays, and try not to sign contracts or make big ticket purchases, as chances are high you'll miss the fine print details and there will end up being some catch. Now, again, I've said this before on the show, it's not, we cannot always just stop everything during a Mercury retrograde period. So it's not always about making sure you don't do something. If you can plan long term, then it's easier. But if not, and something comes up, you have to sign a contract or whatever, it's not so much about what you do, it's about, or what, life throws your way, say there is a problem down the road, it's about how you handle it. So keep that in mind, because it's not like, oh my God, I sinned because I signed a contract during Mercury retrograde, but you should expect that if problems arise, you're not going to be completely and totally shocked. So you just do the best that you can. Now, I like to tell people that Mercury retrograde periods have a strong resonance with our moving into higher consciousness. And that's because our psyches work overtime during Mercury retrograde periods. We're busy bringing forth wisdom from out of our unconscious and embedding it into our more rational, empirical, ego-oriented consciousness. It's like multitasking, right? You can't multitask when you're doing certain things. So, there are many of us who try, but, it depends. I mean, you can't multitask. I can't multitask right now. I'm foolish to do that because it splits my concentration. It's not a good idea to multitask when you're driving, for example, although, of course, many of us do it. So, it's not the best example. But if you split your consciousness in this way, by trying to do several things at one time during Mercury retrograde period, that's when you miss the details. So because the psyche is doing things that we're not aware of consciously, it can impede us on the ego-oriented rational level. So it is better, that is why it's better to review and go over old things rather than start something new. So now also on November 19th, Mars in Pisces, newly in Pisces as of today, is going to square Jupiter in Sag. And it'd be wise not to try to overdo things. This is a very energetic conversation, but I'd caution not overextending yourself, especially since Mercury's retrograde also in Sagittarius. But again, it's a great time to expand your consciousness, particularly along spiritual, creative, and artistic lines. But watch out for being overly egotistical now. This aspect does impart a great deal of energy, like I said, but it can backfire on you if you overextend yourself, become reckless, or again, lose track of details. Jupiter and Sag is big, big, big picture oriented. Remember, Mercury's retrograde's not good with the details either, so double check your work and try not to make mountains out of molehills in the short term. On Thursday, November 22nd, the Sun enters Sagittarius, and on the 22nd or the 23rd, depending on your time zone, we'll experience a Gemini full moon. So stay tuned for more on that. That'll be on my blog by the end of this weekend or early next week at karmicevolution.com. And we'll talk about it much more on next week's show. So now I would like to introduce my guest. I'm going to read you a little bit about her background. RONNIE GALE DREYER, an internationally known astrological consultant, lecturer, teacher, and author, specializes in both Western and Indian astrology and is based in New York City. She's lectured at national and international astrology groups and conferences and her clients and students come from many different countries and all walks of life. The author of several books translated into multiple languages, Ronnie served as editor and/or contributor to numerous anthologies, and most recently co-authored a chapter on Indian astrology in the anthology Religious Transformation in Modern Asia with Dr. Nicholas Campion. She's also written gift books, columns, articles, and book reviews for websites and journals, as well as horoscope columns for the New York Daily News. Ronnie currently conducts ongoing classes and webinars on all subjects astrological. Currently guest lecturer on Indian cosmology for the MA Distance Learning Program in Cultural Astronomy at the University of Wales. She also holds a BA in English Theater Arts from the University of New Mexico and a Master's in South Asian Languages and Cultures from Columbia University, where she studied Sanskrit and Hindi. Ronnie lived in the Netherlands for 13 years, where she co-founded the first astrological computer service and served as the official Dutch representative for astrocartography. She's also worked as a manuscript reader, editorial consultant, and proofreader of New Age and self-help books for several major publishing companies. The former editor of NCGR's member letter from 1999 to 2017, corresponding secretary of the Association for Astrological Networking, or AFAN, from 1992 to 1998, and its presiding officer from 1999 to 2003, Ronnie also served on the AFAN newsletter committee. She's the proud recipient of the Marion D. March Regulus Award for Community Service, which she received at the 2002 United Astrology Conference, or UAC, in Orlando, Florida. Ronnie looks forward to speaking at the New York City NCGR conference on Saturday, November 17th, where she'll lecture on Jupiter and astrocartography, which is using astrology to, vis-a-vis maps, and present a lunchtime talk on Indian astrology. On Sunday, November 18th, she'll be at NCGR Philly in Ocean Grove, Pennsylvania, speaking about the 2019 eclipses. Ronnie also holds an annual webinar on the year ahead, which notes eclipses, planetary stations, ingresses, and notable aspects. Welcome, Ronnie. I have to say, your resume is like so impressive. It's it's like this girl is a genius. She does so many different things. It's unbelievable to me. But I'm so happy to have you on the show today. How are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Great. It makes me tired. It makes me tired listening to all that, frankly. It just shows me how old I am.
No, how wise you are, my dear.
No.
Is it snowing by you?
Yes, it is. It is snowing. Terribly snowing.
I just, with the weather, I'm like, it's like the Brits.
I'm not ready for snow. I'm not.
I have to talk about that. Nobody's ready for snow. It looks like winter wonderland here. So, all right, we're in the same boat then. All right, well, let me first ask you, it's not going to be long until eclipse season is upon us again in early, 2019. Can you give our listeners just a general refresher? I know you were on the show back in February of this year, but, just a general refresher on what to expect from eclipses and the difference between a solar and lunar eclipse in terms of its potential effects and, how long these effects might last.
Okay. So, as most of us learned in school, the lunar eclipse only occurs on a full moon when the sun is opposite the moon and the earth comes between the sun and the moon and blocking the sun's rays from reaching all or part of the moon. So it always depends. The earth passes through a portion of the shadow. A lot of this you can find at nasa.gov. It's the best website to find everything astronomical. And when the full moon blocks all the when the Earth blocks the rays from reaching the moon, it gets eclipsed. Now, sometimes we have a total eclipse, depending on whether it's in the inner shadow or the outer shadow, and sometimes we have a partial eclipse. But we always have a series of two. So we have a full moon, which is the lunar, and then we have a solar, which is the eclipse of the sun, and that's only on a new moon. And that's when the sun and moon are conjoined. They're in a conjunction. And that's when the moon comes between the sun and the earth. So it blocks the light of the sun. And it's the same thing. It depends on whether it is, falling in the outer shadow or inner shadow to see whether it's a partial or a total. And the eclipses occur every 6 months. Without fail, every 6 months, 2 weeks apart. There are some not summers, I shouldn't say summers, it's just lately it's been in the summer. There are some years when we do have 3 eclipses instead of 2. So we had that last summer, for instance, in 2018. We had a solar on July 13th, a lunar on the 27th, and a solar on August 11th.
Yeah, during Mars retrograde.
Exactly. And the lunar eclipse on July 27th was exactly conjoining that Mars. So that was why it was very intense. The thing is with eclipses is that there are always times of great note. Years and years in the ancient times, people saw the sky when they were noting phenomena, and when an eclipse occurred, especially if it was a total eclipse, like in August of 2017, the sky would go dark. It would be great phenomena. You can imagine if what happened in 2017 happened to somebody, thousands of years ago, it like freaked them out, and they had no idea what was going on. So when you started to study astrology, they could see charting eclipses as well as many other events, anything that happened. And they did find, or at least maybe once in a while, maybe a king was born or a king died or something happened with the earth, maybe tremors or earthquakes. But oftentimes I find that if you also look at an eclipse, for instance, and it's near a planetary station, especially a malefic planet, an outer planet stationing retrograde, I find that when you have those two things juxtaposing within a week, really something major happens, because it's kind of like two heavy planetary energies. So the thing is with eclipses is that I find that it just means that when things happen around an eclipse, they take hold of the world. So let's take earthquakes, for instance. We have earthquakes all the time, all over the world. There are constant tremors and, little things that happen. But when things happen that are oftentimes near an eclipse, it might be an earthquake of great note. Like the one in Haiti, for instance. So the thing that happens is that an eclipse makes things noted to you. You notice it. It's really like an outer planet transit in your chart. You take note, and if you find you're dealing with eclipses, look at what happens around an eclipse. I think for me, it brings things out in the open. Things that have gotten hidden are suddenly revealed. I found, for instance, when we had the Ebola crisis, we had the crisis of Ebola. Now, Ebola was something that was going on in the world and in Africa for years. It wasn't something new.
Right.
And then suddenly, the fall that the eclipse happened, there were two eclipses, and suddenly, it was in October of 2014, there was a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse, and suddenly, Ebola was in the headlines as if it was this new thing. So it was just kind of interesting, all the things that happen around eclipses. But it's not always that bad things happen. Those are sometimes the things you take note of. We tend to focus on the negative rather than the positive. So the point is that if you do something on a full moon, it's supposed to be really wonderful. It's a climax. A new moon is a beginning. In ancient times, I study Indian astrology, for instance, they have a little bit of a different take on a new moon because they consider it to be a dark moon. So they don't always like when you begin things on the new moon. They would rather begin things a few days later when things are starting, when a sliver of the moon is, coming out. So I think when you look at the eclipses, especially when you look at the degrees of the eclipses and where they are in your chart, they're going to make an impact. They're going to, look at your chart and create an event or an awakening. You know what I mean? And sometimes change or awakenings are difficult, and people are not always prepared for that kind of change in their life, and that's why they seek astrologers, to tell you.
Right. I think it's isn't it Bill? Was it Bill? I always get them confused. Bill Meridian, who wrote the book on eclipses. He talks about them being like a jump start to a car.
Right.
So, there's a shock a lot of times, but it could be positive or it could be negative. I just want to clarify one thing you said for the audience. You mentioned malefics, if they happen to malefic. So everybody knows that's in traditional astrology. Malefic is, Saturn and Mars, the greater and lesser malefic, which is, not good.
Yeah, they're considered malefic, but I think in kind of modern terminology, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, I mean, whether you call them benefic or malefic, they are just great transformational planets. So whenever they are stationing, like we'll see the eclipse in January is right around the Uranus station, things happen that are going to be momentous. You know what I'm saying? So right. I don't know whether that's malefic or benefic, but, I don't know that,
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just comment because, I practice psychological and evolutionary astrology, and certainly in the latter, I would say in the former too, there really is, in modern astrology or in these times, person-centered, astrology, they don't use those terms much. Right. They find them to be too dire and too predictive. And so most of us are more into forecasting the weather and not looking at, not telling someone that something horrible is going to happen because we don't really know,
But I think it's also like when I learned astrology, and I learned aspects, like we all did, I was always taught having a lot of squares in your chart are actually good for your productivity and for your advancement in life, because if you have all trines, you're just going to sit on a beach, but if you have squares, you push yourself forward. And so that's the same thing with malefics. I don't think that the term necessarily evokes the right images. But yeah, but traditionally they would say, oh my God, Mars and Saturn are in the sky together. That's bad, go in your house and pray. That kind of thing.
Right. Well,
I think change is hard, I think that's really what it comes down to.
I pointed out, I think it was last week's show, Jupiter's move into Sagittarius is not always positive either. Jupiter's the benefic and Venus lesser, but when either when they get together or when there's something else going on with Jupiter, it can expand a problem, But in terms of the level of consciousness, it's, if we believe that it's for a reason, then it's up to each of us individually to figure out eventually, and that, why this happened to me. And that is what leads to greater consciousness, Right. So tell me, how important is the house in which, because I know, it's important if an eclipse falls on a particular planet, angle, or other sensitive point in an individual's chart. But if not, then the house becomes important.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
how does that work,
Well, I think the thing is that one of the important things with eclipses is, again, look at it like an outer planet transit. I always tell people, like, when I started learning, I think we're getting more into doing that. When I started learning astrology many years ago, they really weren't talking about it in that way. There were very few books written about eclipses in terms of the natal chart. And that's really because in traditional, classical literature, they weren't really looked at in terms of the natal chart. And eclipses, the way eclipses are formed, you can see in your chart, if there's a full moon or a new moon and the nodes are very close to it, that means it's an eclipse. So the eclipse, a normal lunation, is really defined to become an eclipse by the nodes. So those nodes, if you track your nodal transit, you're also tracking the transits of the eclipse, because the nodes and the eclipses are going to be also going through a sign, like for 18 months, the same kind of retrograde pattern. So, so of course this year's eclipses, are going to now start to, become strong in the tropical signs of Cancer and Capricorn. We're moving out of the Leo Aquarius eclipses.
Right.
So that's the difference. And I think what happens is that you have to look in your own chart and see if an eclipse is going to be on the degree, on a degree of a planet, or opposing it, or trining it. And then that degree is kind of hot, and there might be other planets that cross it, but you're definitely going to have the node cross it either before or after the eclipse, because the nodes in the eclipses are traveling together. So that's one thing. If you don't have a planet or angle near an eclipse, like I always tell people, it's going to be in a house somewhere. It's going to be somewhere in your chart.
Right.
For sure. So what you do is you just go through the meaning of the houses and just look at that eclipse, because depending on what house system you use, I mean, if you use like a whole sign house system, that means each house is equivalent to a sign, then you're going to have that eclipse prominent in that house for about a year and a half. If you don't have if you use like Placidus or Calc or Regiomontanus or whatever, it might be a shorter or longer span because of the signs. You're going to have intercepted signs in the houses and things like that.
Right.
But I think that it just awakens something in that house, and it forces you in that particular period, that year and a half, to focus on that house. But the houses as a polarity, because you're going to have the new moon and full moon, so that they're going to hit both. So if it's the 1st and 7th, obviously you want to look at your relationships, and you want to look at any kind of change, any kind of revelation. And the message really is that it has to be transformed somehow. So you do evolutionary astrology, so the nodes are very important for you.
Right, definitely.
It's the same kind of, really, I think, the same kind of meaning. It means that it's kind of like sink or swim. It's like you're forced to transform things to a different level. If not, they're going to keep coming at you. You know what I mean? So you're kind of forced to deal with those issues. And so that's kind of how I chart it. So you really, look at what each house, what the polarity is. It's really, I would take 2nd and 8th and 3rd and 9th, 4th and 10th. 5th and 11th, 6th and 12th. I don't take one house without the other. It's
right.
So I think that's really super important to look at. And I think this year, is really an important year for for those. Most of the listeners, I'm assuming, are going to be tropicalists. So the tropical Cancer Capricorn axis is what's going to be powerful. We already started last summer with a couple of with the eclipse in July, in Cancer. But the thing is that then we had a couple of Leo Aquarius eclipses, and the last Leo Aquarius eclipse is going to be January 21st. But the one on January 5th, on the East Coast anyway, it's 8:28 p.m. But if you're in Europe, or you're going to have it in January 6th. That eclipse is going to start with a whole new sign emphasis. So if you use the whole sign house system, you have to really take a look at what's going on with Cancer Capricorn. And because we are already used to the Saturn Pluto moving through it, it's going to be more intense, just more of the same, but even more intensity. Kind of building up through.
So that's you were mentioned. So you're talking about the first solar eclipse at 15 Capricorn
the first solar eclipse of January 5th is at 15 Capricorn. If you do a sidereal zodiac, it's a 21 Sagittarius. So you go back 24 degrees. And that eclipse, if you look at where Saturn and Pluto are, what's going to happen is that the Saturn and Pluto start kind of chasing those degrees, because Pluto is already past that, but Saturn is moving up to it.
Right.
So when you start looking at the year, and you look, for instance, at the degrees of Saturn Pluto, what's fascinating is that they're both obviously leading up to when they're completely conjunct in January of 2020. But what's happening now is that, Saturn is moving direct, and it will retrograde at the end of it'll retrograde at the end of April, very end of April, and that will retrograde at 20 degrees of Pluto. And that is
of
Capricorn, sorry. Right. And that's kind of where Pluto has been hovering around.
Right.
So basically, I would say to people, especially those who have their angles or personal planets, anywhere from like maybe 18 to 22 of the cardinals, to really pay attention to what's been happening to them in terms of what the planet or point represents in their chart. You know what I'm saying? Because they've already started to feel it. Um, and so I think that that's what the important thing is with this year, is that that sign is, the sign of Capricorn, and of course on the sidereal level again Sagittarius, because I do Indian, and I might have some Indian viewers who are gonna, could get confused. So with them it's Sagittarius, Gemini, but with the tropical list it's going to be Cancer, Capricorn, and I think that that's why, on a mundane level, of course, we're really looking a lot at governments and all of this. A lot of the more, kind of totalitarian emphasis that we have around the world, this very Saturn, Pluto, regimentation. And I think that that's going to be, I think it gets kind of more intense before it gets better with Jupiter's entrance into Capricorn, at the end of the year. And I think that's what's going to be a very interesting play that I haven't yet figured out totally. But, we're going to have Saturn and Pluto and then Jupiter coming into, to take in the mix.
Right. Yeah. That's going to be interesting. Well, do you think that, so we have such a huge Capricorn influence now with both Pluto and Saturn there now, and then of course when they can join and when Jupiter moves in there. But since you mentioned the polarity point, so for example, in early January when the solar eclipse is at 15 Capricorn, the opposite is 15 Cancer.
Exactly.
And when you're talking about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, in terms of more totalitarianism, it occurs to me that the polarity point from this particular eclipse anyway, and then later on in July 16th at 24 Cap, obviously the opposite too is 24 Cancer, is more nationalism, because of the rulership of the moon. Cancer's rulership of the moon is the public, right, and the people. So. Are you foreseeing, you are foreseeing that will, where everybody's going to go more hard right?
I think they're going to go hard right, but then I think it's going to go back. I think like with all cycles, it's going to go back. So I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think that's what that Saturn Pluto is going to do. And I think we are, I don't want to go, I haven't done as much research yet on what's going to happen because I like to look at cycles. But, we are heading again towards, let's say you go back, you can even go back to like the year 2000, 2001, which is, of course, 2001 always evokes those horrible images. But the point is that we're moving into, again, the cycles of the nodes, where they were at that particular time as well. So I think that the thing is that I have, my own quick, very, very, very quick take on things. Simply is that things get very, very controlled before there's a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that a lot of that is going to be maybe Uranus moving through Taurus. It's going to have more of a Venusian effect, and Jupiter coming into Capricorn. So we're going to have the trine. So I think what you're going to see is once Jupiter kind of moves into that area, I think it should make things a little bit different, you know what I mean? But I do think that what's going to happen, and I think it could affect the markets. Capricorn is much tighter, you know what I mean? So now you're seeing more of a surge backwards, you know what I mean? We went forward with an crazy inflated market, and now it's kind of moving, back the other way. But I think the thing is also that when you look at where the nodes were, April 2000, they went into Cancer, and the North Node went into Cancer, South went into Capricorn, and then it went out of that sign in October 2001. So, you get that year and a half, that's why I'm saying is that you have to look back and say, okay, 2000, 2001, that it had to get crescendoed before I think things start to get a little bit different. But I don't want to move that much into that as much as saying that.
Let me interrupt you just real quickly because I have a question. I've heard everything you've said. Two things. What you mentioned, Jupiter going into Capricorn, and that's in about a year, and right. Obviously that we'll be moving way closer to the Saturn Pluto conjunction in early 2020. But right. What if things are going to get more restrictive, how do you view the effect of Jupiter and Sag now? Because, you know, it's like I said, Jupiter, the great benefic, you know, things can flow very easily in Sag, but Sag is about politics and the law and, you know, morals and things like that. So are you saying that if things go right, the Jupiter and Sagittarius is going to help it move more easily to the right? Or will it have?
I think that what happens, what's
you know
happening.
What I mean? Will it have a more benefic in terms of balancing?
Yeah, I probably should frame this according to the eclipses, which is what we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
No, but I understand. There's so much to say that I know we both like to get off on tangents. But no, I just wanted to say that just to follow my other stream, I'll get back to this though, but I wanted to say that this.
No problem.
I just wanted to get back to just the degrees of the eclipses, just to run through it a little bit. So the January 5th eclipse is Sun, Moon, and Capricorn, and it's got the Pluto at 20 Capricorn and Saturn at 11 degrees of Capricorn. So so that's what's going on, with that particular eclipse. And then you get the one on January 21st, and that one is the last one that's in tropical Leo Aquarius. That one is at 0 degrees, and that's a full moon. And that's going to then, not be that close to Saturn, which is at 13, and then 21 Capricorn is Pluto. But then what happens is that in between the next set, which is during the summer, we're going to get Pluto stationing retrograde at 23 on April 24th, and Saturn stationing retrograde at 20 degrees of Capricorn, April 29th. And that 20 degrees actually corresponds to where the eclipse was in July 2018, and then one in 2020 in January. Basically, those degrees are the hot degrees. So everybody, like I said, who has the cardinal, their things in their chart on those degrees cardinal are going to be going through major shifts this next year. And then what happens is that we go to the summer and we get the solar total eclipse of Cancer at 10 degrees. And then what we get is that Pluto and Saturn, Pluto is 22 Capricorn, Saturn is 17 Capricorn. And then July 17th, the sun and moon are opposite each other at 24 degrees, which is where the Saturn-Pluto conjunction is going to be in January. Do you see what I'm saying? So they're all linking together, and Pluto is 21 Capricorn. So the whole cycle, I think, of Saturn and Pluto is going to culminate then in January. But with Jupiter at Sagittarius, the way I look at it is Jupiter is in Sagittarius over there on one side, and then the Saturn, Pluto in Capricorn. And yeah, they do come together with a semi-sextile at some point, but basically they're like two separate camps. You know what I'm saying? I think that what happens is this Jupiter, there is going to be optimism, and there is going to be sometimes, in fact, Jupiter in Sagittarius, though, can be the opposite. It can be complete, overdone with Jupiter. Everything gets overdone. There could be more fundamentalism. But I think that Jupiter is trying to find a way to connect with the Saturn Pluto. And it doesn't do that until it moves forward and then enters Capricorn and then comes to conjoin the Pluto and Saturn. And I think 2020 is going to be a year about that. It's going to be, how is this now going to all come together? How is what has happened in the past couple years going to be rectified with the Jupiter coming in and giving us at least more hope? So I think, to me, that's kind of like right now, the Jupiter in Sagittarius stands, but we haven't figured out how to connect it yet.
Well, I think that Jupiter is going to square Neptune in Pisces during this next year a couple times too, and it occurs to me because I just was part of a panel in the Astrological Society of Princeton, just kind of doing a postmortem on the election, the midterm elections, and a couple of us mentioned when Saturn squared Neptune through late 2015 and to the fall of 2016, which was one particular energy that was in the sky when there was a rise of fascism back in the 30s and stuff like that. But Jupiter square Neptune, it's kind of like he's coming along instead of Saturn, right? Saturn squared first, and now it's Jupiter. And that's a lot of altruism and idealism.
Right.
So it feels to me, and I don't know if my question is, do you agree? Because what it feels like to me is when we're going with all of this bottom line Saturnian energy, or moving towards it more strongly in 2020, that the other side, like you just said, Jupiter's in one camp, while Saturn, Pluto, are in the other. Right. That we may have more ungrounded idealism, like it's kind of like saying, oh my God, is this really happening? Right. And sort of fantasizing about what it should be like all the way up to 180 degrees on the other side of the spectrum. And when Jupiter hits Capricorn, there may be a kind of boom, you know, where it's like, oh, okay, come back down to earth now and figure out what's actually realistically possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I kind of see that both, I mean, that's like what you're seeing now. You're seeing two sides of the issue, not only in America. You see it in UK, for instance. I mean, there's the people who are pro-Brexit. There are people who are anti-Brexit, and they cannot figure out how to work the two together. You know what I mean? So this is what we have. We have just two camps. So it's not just America. It's a world trend. America tends to be on the stage because we're American, and also because everybody looks to America. But if you look to the UK, it's the same pattern. You have these two sides, and they just don't know yet how to work together. So
I don't know if you saw the news this morning, and I only read like the first paragraph. I saw the headline in the New York Times today. The two cabinet members, or I don't know, call it cabinet, they just resigned in the UK.
Right.
And the pound just dropped drastically. Right.
Well, look what's happening in America. I mean, the cabinet has been a mess for the last, the cabinet's going to keep going crazy this year. I mean, in America too. But I think what's going to happen is then by the time, Jupiter in Sagittarius, I mean, obviously, if I do Vedic astrology, it's still in Scorpio. But if you're looking at Jupiter in Sagittarius, it is great emphasis on Jupiter. But Jupiter is not necessarily practical. It's still idealistic. So unless the Jupiter combines with Saturn, it doesn't yet know how to implement it. So, we had a great idealistic election. I mean, of course, if you're on the side of the Democrats, you had a great election day, at least for the House. If you're not on that side, it was very disappointing. So the point is that you have to figure out then how to take this great hope, let's say, and do something with it. So I think this year is going to be a year when they're going to try very hard, but it's not going to necessarily come together yet, because these eclipses are waking all this up, and the Saturn Pluto that are kind of trailing these eclipses, in addition to the fact that we have this Saturn South Node conjunction. Last year, we had Mars conjunct the South Node, remember, a billion times. This year, we're going to have Saturn conjunct. And of course, in Indian astrology, those are two, quote, malefics. I don't know in evolutionary astrology how you look at the Saturn South Node conjunction.
Well, Saturn South Node, I think that, the South Node in Capricorn tends to have, we're looking at the collective now when we're looking at the transiting nodes, but natally, it's, you come in feeling a great sense of responsibility,
Right.
It's like, the nodes, of course, are karmic, so it's like what we came into this lifetime, whether we believe in past lives or not, it's what the portal through which we came into this lifetime. So we may tend to feel responsible for things that we don't necessarily have to be responsible for. I mean, one of the things that I say about Capricorn energy is, if you want to know if someone is Saturnian or carries a lot of Capricorn energy, if they come to you to discuss an issue or a problem and they seem to want to either talk about a solution or they're reaching out for another perspective, anytime you give them a solution, a potential solution, or a suggestion, they say, yeah, but. Mm-hmm. You know, so I call it the yeah but sign. So I think it's like the South Node is like, well, you don't have to take care of, your family. There are other people. Oh yeah, but my sister can't do it.
Right.
You know, she's an idiot, or whatever. So they have these kind of again, like ego-oriented ideas and perspectives that are traditional, perhaps, you know what I mean? Because Capricorn is traditional. And you always want to lose, as you well know, what doesn't work, what's negative about the sign. And in a lot of times it's this uber responsibility, and bring forward the positive qualities. So Capricorn positive qualities are learning from your experiences, as Liz Green talks about in terms of psychological astrology. And you mentioned in sense of like trines versus squares, right? Squares are an internal tension or an energy, and trines are easy. You just, I can do that, no problem. I do that with my two hands tied behind my back. So the Capricorn South Node is to leave behind all this uber responsibility, this reliance on tradition only, because that's the way we've always done it, and to take the maturity that you've learned, no pain, no gain. We remember, as Liz Green says, the things that caused us pain. You put your hand in the flame because mommy told you 10 times not to go near the fire. You are never going to forget, never to put your hand in the fire again.
Right.
And that's the way Saturn's Capricorn works. So
well, it's also a hard lesson. I mean, last year we had Mars retrograde, conjoining the South Node 3 times. Right. The last time that happened was 1952. Now the Saturn is going to do the same thing. It's going to conjoin that South Node 3 times this year. It's going to do it at the end of April. It's going to do it around July 4th. I mean, these dates are just, they conjoin for a few weeks at a time. So around. Saturn conjoins it when it's retrograde around July 4th. And then, it's going to basically, be there on those occasions. And what happens is that I think this is going to be a hard year in terms of we are going to have to consolidate things, and lessons are going to be learned. And it's not just politics. It's all in our families. It's in our homes. It's in our schools. It's everywhere, because that's the mode. It's a very strong Capricorn, Saturn, Pluto, kind of mode. And we are going to feel a lot of responsibility. And we have to also, with Jupiter and Sagittarius, of course, we want to also be able to experience the joy, that life, offers as well. But we might have to look a little harder, in some respects, to actually find it. That's kind of how I look at it.
The silver lining, you mean, in the cloud?
Yeah, really. I mean, I think that the other thing is that with the Jupiter Neptune, we might also, there might be more, more focus on spirituality, on religion. On the negative side, there might be more drugs. There might be more food issues. There might be more indulgences. I mean, the opiate crisis, for instance, could get worse before it gets better. Like everything else, I think things might get worse. There's going to be more regulations that some people will be happy about, some people won't. And I think the other thing is that when you're dealing with the eclipses, and I really want to stress this point, is because they're made up of the nodes, especially when you have a total eclipse, the nodes are close. So, for instance, the January 5th eclipse, which is a partial solar eclipse, the node will hit that degree next September. But Saturn is going to hit that degree early February, August 4th around, and October 31st. So if you have something on that degree, 15 Capricorn, let's say between 13 and 17 of the cardinals, you're going to get hit with that. Now, of course, if you have it in Taurus or in Virgo, you're going to have the trine. And the trine is still responsibility because it's still Saturn oriented.
Right.
So you have to figure out with those eclipses, look at those dates when Saturn is going to be at that degree, and also about because I have something at 15 Aries. So I remember in 2014-15, we already had the Uranus-Pluto. Uranus was going over that degree. Pluto was squaring it. We had eclipses in that degree. So you can go back to those years and see what was hitting between 13 and 17 cardinal.
Right.
And look at your chart. And then the total lunar eclipse of January 21st at 0 Leo, 0 Aquarius is going to be involved with the Uranus squaring that degree, because Uranus has been going in and out of 0 Taurus.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So people have already been experiencing that, that zero, that degree in the fixed sign.
Right, because it's been squaring the nodes now too.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's been trining the fire signs like Jupiter now. But the node already went over that degree at the end of October. So the end of October.
I love you, Ronnie. You are a fountain of wealth. But what I have to tell you is we're almost out of time. And I just want to give you the last minute so you can tell people how to reach you.
Okay.
Sign up for your newsletter, contact you for a reading, know.
I'll do that. I just want to say the node hit the degree of the total lunar eclipse of 0 Leo Aquarius on October 27th. Uranus squared that June 2018 and October and March 2019. Then Uranus will be finished squaring that and it'll be in Taurus. RonnieDryer.com. You can go to my website and you can reach me there.
Okay, wait. RonnieGaledreyer.com.
Yes.
You are a treasure. I want you to come back. I want you to come back on the show soon. It's a pleasure to interview you, and your knowledge is so rich. So maybe we can go over after the eclipses in January. I'd love to have you back in February or March just to talk about some of these repercussions and stuff. So,
and as you know, we talk a lot together, so we can.
I know we're both we're both Mercury in Aries, which I love. The Taurus suns, right? So we have to get together so we can sit and eat and talk.
Okay, great. I look forward to it. I do
too. Thank you so much, Ronnie, for being here. Thank you to everyone else for joining me. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. I hope you'll join me next week on November, 22nd? That's actually Thanksgiving, so we'll probably have a pre-recorded show. And I look forward to seeing you or speaking to you then. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free